This happened on New Year's night. I was spending the holiday completely by myself. I'd already done the whole family thing for Christmas, and when New Year's rolled around, I didn't really have anyone to make plans with. So instead of going out, I stayed in. I had a couple beers, parked myself on the couch, and let the TV run all night. I watched the entire Times Square countdown, and once that was over, I flipped through some old holiday movies just to have background noise. I wasn't tired at all. By the time it hit around 2 in the morning, I felt restless. I'd been sitting there all day, and I needed to move around. I walked over and looked out the windows. There was some snow coming down, not a lot, just enough to coat everything. I knew it was cold and pitch dark outside, but for some reason, the idea of going for a walk sounded really appealing. So I threw on a jacket, a hat, some gloves, and stepped outside to wander around the neighborhood. Almost immediately, I noticed how quiet it was. Even at 2 a.m., especially on New Year's, I expected at least a little noise parties, cars driving by, something. But there was nothing. Every house just had its Christmas lights glowing softly. No headlights on the roads, no movement at all. The streets felt completely empty. It was actually kind of peaceful. I honestly couldn't tell you how long I was walking. I wasn't exactly sober, so time felt blurry, and I wasn't following any real route. I just drifted through different streets, turning wherever felt right. At some point, I ended up at the local park. The walking path didn't look like it had been shoveled since earlier that day, but the snow only seemed a couple inches deep. I figured it wouldn't be a problem and started down the trail anyway. A change of scenery sounded nice. I hadn't gone very far when I realized two things. First, the snow was getting thicker and harder to walk through. Second, there were no lights. Normally, the path had these small lampposts along it, but they were all off, probably shut down for the winter. After a few minutes of walking in near total darkness, I decided it wasn't worth it and turned around. I was heading back, dragging my boots through the snow, maybe a minute into the walk, when something caught my attention. There was another set of footprints in the snow, running right alongside my own from just minutes earlier. There hadn't been any other tracks before. It looked like someone had been walking directly behind me. I didn't see anyone. When I tried to follow the prints to see where they went, I realized they veered off the trail and disappeared into the unlit area beyond the path. Complete darkness. For all I knew, someone could have been standing just a few feet in front of me, and I'd never see them. That's when I picked up my pace and got out of there. Though even then, I didn't fully register how unsettling it was. Looking back, I think the alcohol dulled my instincts. Someone following my tracks and then stepping straight into the darkness should have set off way more alarms. At the time, I convinced myself it was just a coincidence. I left the park area and kept walking through the neighborhood, not heading straight home yet. I wandered for another 15 minutes. I didn't really see anyone else, and that made me feel like whatever I'd imagined was behind me. Eventually, I went back to my house, took off my winter clothes, and decided to hop in the shower, hoping that by the time I was done, I'd finally be tired enough to go to bed. I was already partway up the stairs when it finally hit me how dark it was. The entire upstairs was pitch black. That alone stopped me in my tracks. I'm the type of person who leaves lights on constantly, especially upstairs, and I hadn't even gone up there since I woke up that morning. I knew for a fact those lights should have been on. I get how that might sound like a tiny detail to obsess over, but even if I'd been completely drunk, I still would have remembered leaving them on. I carefully took the last few steps to the top, leaned into the hallway, and flipped the switch. The light came on, but I wasn't even sure what I was expecting to see. I slowly moved through the hall, cracking each door open just enough to look inside the rooms. Nothing seemed out of place. I made a point to close every door again as I went. That's why, When I checked the final room and turned back around, my stomach dropped. The door closest to the stairs was now standing wide open. In that moment, I was absolutely convinced someone else was in my house. I stood there frozen for a few seconds before calling out, asking if anyone was there. My voice sounded small, and I was terrified to move. Whoever it was could have been hiding in that room or already slipping back downstairs. They could have been anywhere. I remember inching forward down the hallway, trying to stay quiet, my heart racing and this heavy, sick feeling settling in my chest as I approached the open doorway. And then everything went black. And no, this wasn't a dream. I came to lying on the hallway floor, my head pounding and my thoughts completely scrambled. I had a brutal migraine, and judging by how things felt, only 10 minutes or so had passed. It was obvious I'd been attacked and knocked unconscious, with no memory of what happened after those last few seconds. My vision kept blurring in and out, but I managed to call 911 right away. Whoever broke in was already gone. I told the police everything I could remember, even though large chunks of it felt missing. What still eats at me is that gap in my memory. Somewhere in those lost moments, I probably saw the person who did it long enough to describe him. There's a chance I might have even recognized him, but it's like my own mind locked that part away. After that night, there were hardly any updates. Nothing ever came from the investigation. I still don't know who it was or what they wanted, but I honestly believe they never intended for me to wake up at all. I worked nights at a ski resort in a small mountain town, officially listed as maintenance, but loosely labeled as security too. Most of what I did was basic cleaning and upkeep, but after a few overnight break-ins, people trying to steal ski and snowboard equipment, or sneaking onto the slopes after hours, the resort decided to treat the night shift more seriously. From that point on, they scheduled 2 people overnight to handle regular work and discourage anyone from trespassing. There weren't any security cameras or anything like that, so the security part of my job didn't really change how I worked. Once the overnight shift started, the break-ins stopped entirely. Months went by without a single issue. The most excitement we got was someone occasionally walking up to the door and peering inside. Other than that, nights were dead quiet. And while I technically wasn't alone, it usually felt that way. My coworker, Matthew, was always assigned the same shift, but he worked on the opposite end of the resort. The building was split into 2 massive sections connected by a single hallway. Most nights, I never even crossed paths with him. Sometimes weeks would go by without us seeing each other at all, so for all intents and purposes, I felt like I was working solo. That night started no differently than any other. I clocked in and began cleaning the main floor. During peak season, the place got trashed pretty quickly, so while the work itself wasn't difficult, there was always plenty of it. About an hour into my shift, I was still in the main room when I heard a sharp tapping sound. It almost sounded like someone knocking on glass. I put my supplies down and walked toward the front of the building, where most of the windows were. At first, I didn't see anything, but when I got closer to one of the windows, I noticed footprints pressed into the snow beneath it. The tracks led right up to the glass, then curved around the side of the building. Not knowing what to make of it, I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. I figured it could have been someone who got lost, and if not, then it was my job to tell them to leave. But once I was outside, I saw the footprints continue from the window toward the parking lot. The lot had already been plowed, and from there, the trail disappeared completely. It was unsettling, but it was freezing and pitch dark, and I wasn't about to circle the entire building alone. I went back inside and tried to focus on my work, hoping whoever it was wouldn't come back. About 30 minutes went by. By then, any tracks outside would have been buried under fresh snow, and I convinced myself it wasn't worth stressing over anymore. That's when I heard several doors opening near the connecting hallway. A moment later, Matthew walked into my section. He looked shaken, confused, almost, and the first thing he asked was what I was doing there. I stared at him for a second and told him I was just working. He nodded, but the way he did it made it seem like my answer didn't line up with whatever he was thinking. I asked if everything was all right. He said, yeah, brushing it off and saying he must have just been tired. Before he left, I mentioned the footprints outside and asked if they'd been his. He immediately said no. I half expected him to explain why he seemed so on edge, especially after I told him about the strange thing I'd seen. The way he was acting made me think something weird had happened on his side of the resort, too. But he didn't say anything else. He just turned around and headed back through the hallway to his section. To be clear, Matthew and I weren't friends. We barely knew each other. He was quite a bit older than me, and when we did talk, it was strictly about work. That's why I didn't push him for more answers or follow him to see what was going on. I went back to cleaning, but my mind wasn't in it. For the next hour, I couldn't stop thinking about how off everything felt that night right up until I started to believe nothing else was going to happen. Out of nowhere, a loud crash echoed from the hallway that connected both sides of the resort. It sounded like a door slamming shut or something solid being thrown into a wall. It startled me enough that I immediately stopped what I was doing and went to check on Matthew. I headed toward the connecting corridor first, but nothing looked out of place. So I kept going into the other half of the building where Matthew was supposed to be working. He wasn't there. I called out to him, asking if he was all right, over and over, but there was no response at all. That's when the anxiety really set in. As I reached the back area of his section, my stomach sank. The rear exit was standing wide open. Cold air and snow were blowing inside, and judging by how fresh it looked, the door couldn't have been open for long. I rushed over and stepped outside to look. I didn't see anyone, but I immediately noticed fresh footprints in the snow leading away from the building, heading uphill toward the ski lifts. There was absolutely no reason for Matthew to be out there in the middle of the night, which made my nerves spike even more. I yelled his name again, but the wind swallowed my voice. Now I was genuinely scared. I went back through the building and checked every room, every corner, hoping I'd somehow missed him. Nothing. The only thing that made any sense at all were those tracks outside. I ran back to my side of the resort, grabbed my coat, and hurried out through the open door. I started following the footprints, and they stretched on much farther than I expected. Outside, everything was unnervingly silent. Just the sound of wind pushing snow across the ground. No lights, no movement, no sign of anyone else. The tracks led me all the way to the base of the ski lifts and partway up a small hill, where I finally stopped. From there, the footprints continued past the resort boundary and disappeared into the trees lining the slope. Beyond that tree line, there were no lights at all, just dense mountain forest. My heart was pounding now, and a sick realization crept in. These might not even be Matthew's footprints. I called his name one more time. After several long seconds of nothing, I saw something move deep among the trees. A figure stepped into view and turned to face me. Even in the dim light, I could tell it wasn't Matthew. I didn't think I ran. I sprinted back down the hill toward the resort, slipping and falling as my boots caught in the heavy snow. I didn't stop until I was back inside. Whatever was out there didn't chase me, but I knew I was being watched. I slammed the door shut and bolted to the front desk, using the phone there to call the police. I had no idea what was happening, but I wasn't going back out alone. Being that far up in the mountains, the police were about 30 minutes away. I hid in the equipment storage closet for the entire wait, surrounded by rental gear, listening to the wind howl outside and the unsettling silence inside the empty building. About 10 minutes in, I heard what sounded like a door opening somewhere on the other side of the resort, but I didn't move. Nothing else happened until the police arrived. What they found afterward was even worse. Another set of footprints had appeared, leading back up to the rear door. Whoever had been out there came back, possibly looking for me. It took the police less than half an hour to officially list Matthew as missing. According to the officers, there were no clear signs of a struggle inside the resort. That led them to believe Matthew may have known the person who took him, or that he'd been convinced to go outside willingly. Once the tracks reached the woods, there was no way to follow them any farther. For a while, I was treated as a potential suspect since I was one of the last people to see him. Eventually, they cleared me completely. The entire situation still haunts me. It's hard not to wonder if I should have done more. But I also know that if I'd followed those tracks deeper into the forest, or tried to play hero, there's a very real chance I'd be missing too. This happened about 4 years ago, right around the holidays. I'd driven all the way out to a small town in Montana where my parents lived, planning to surprise them for Christmas. I stayed for about a week, and then it was time to make the long drive back home. The trip was roughly 16 hours, which never really bothered me. I was used to long drives and didn't mind pulling into rest stops to nap instead of paying for a hotel. It felt quicker that way. I actually left earlier than planned that afternoon because there was talk of a major winter storm moving in. My hope was that if I got a head start, I could beat it. That plan didn't last long. About 4 or 5 hours into the drive, the storm hit hard. 1 minute the road was empty and calm, and the next, snow was coming down so thick it felt instant. The wind picked up too, shoving my car around and blasting snow straight into the windshield. At first, I still felt in control. There were no other cars around, and despite the conditions, I wasn't sliding or losing grip. But after driving like that for over an hour, the constant focus started wearing me down. Snow was building up on the road, and then my phone buzzed with a winter storm warning. A couple minutes later, I lost all service. That's when it stopped feeling manageable. If something went wrong out there, I'd have no way to call for help. So I took the next rest stop a few miles down the highway. It was one of those small rest areas tucked into the trees, just off the road. The parking lot was already dusted with snow, and there was a single service building sitting in the middle. Only one other car was parked there, way off to the side. It looked like it had been there a while. The roof was buried under a thick layer of snow. Within minutes of pulling in, the storm somehow intensified. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. I couldn't even see the other car anymore, and the wind was howling hard enough to shake my own. I couldn't imagine anyone driving in conditions like that. I waited in my car for over an hour. Eventually, boredom and discomfort got the better of me, and I decided to run inside the building to use the restroom. The moment I stepped out, the freezing wind and ice stung my face and hands. I rushed inside. The building was small, just a simple lobby with a few benches, some racks of travel pamphlets, and 2 doors leading to the restrooms. Thankfully, the heater was working. I stood there for a minute just warming up, watching the snow rage outside through the windows. I could barely make out the other car in the lot. By now, snow had completely covered its windshield. What struck me as odd was that it didn't seem to be running. With temperatures well below zero, whoever was in there would have been freezing without the heat on. After a moment, I walked up to the men's restroom and pushed the door. It opened maybe an inch before snapping shut. I tried again, and this time it barely moved at all. I stepped back. It wasn't locked. This felt different. It felt like someone was standing on the other side, holding the door closed. I stared at it, frozen, trying to process what was happening. The whole thing felt wrong. I considered just using the women's restroom instead, telling myself that if there really was only one other person here, it shouldn't matter. But my gut told me to leave. Something about the situation felt off, and I didn't want to find out why that door was being blocked. I quickly turned and headed back outside. As I stepped out of the building, I heard the bathroom door swing open behind me, but I didn't look back. I walked straight through the storm and got back into my car. By that point, the storm had completely swallowed the rest stop. The parking lot was buried in snow, and I wasn't even sure my car could move if I tried to leave. I wanted to get out of there, even if it was just to make it a few miles down the road. But the last thing I wanted was to get stuck halfway out. So I stayed put, waiting and watching. I kept replaying the bathroom incident in my head, trying to come up with any explanation that made sense. I couldn't. Nothing explained how someone would know I was about to walk in and already be positioned at the door to stop me. A few minutes later, something started to take shape in the whiteout. A figure slowly appeared between my car and the rest stop building. It was a man. As soon as I could see him clearly, he stopped and stood there in the middle of the storm. He looked like he was on the phone, talking to someone, facing in my direction. I couldn't tell if he was actually looking at me, but he stayed there for a while, pacing back and forth in that same spot, still on the phone. Then, little by little, he began drifting closer to my car, taking a few steps, stopping, then moving again, like he was trying not to make it obvious. When he got closer, I saw it clearly. He was staring straight into my car, and then his expression changed. He broke into this wide, exaggerated smile and started walking directly toward me. He came right up to my window and tapped on the glass, still grinning. Fear hit me all at once. As ridiculous as it sounds, I couldn't move. My body just locked up. The tapping turned into harder knocks, almost pounding. It was loud enough that I expected the window to crack. Then, behind him, through the blowing snow, I saw a second man burst out of the rest stop building and start running toward us. That snapped me out of it. I threw the car into reverse, my heart dropping as the tires spun uselessly in the snow. The car didn't move. The man at my window was getting closer, and then suddenly, the car jerked backward and caught traction. I reversed hard, shifted into drive, and took off. In the split second before I sped away, the second man hurled something straight at my windshield. It was a knife. It bounced off, but left a massive crack spidering across the glass. I didn't slow down. I drove like my life depended on it, praying I wouldn't lose control or slide off the road. I fully expected them to chase me, but as far as I could tell, they didn't. I kept going until the storm finally eased and my phone signal came back. By the time police responded, it had been too long. They didn't find either of the men. What they did find was the car still sitting in the middle of the rest stop lot, completely untouched. And it wasn't either of theirs. The car belonged to someone else. When police showed me a photo of the owner, I didn't recognize him at all. Over the next few days, I learned that the man was missing. No trace of him. From what his family said, he'd been on a road trip too and likely pulled off at the rest stop to sleep. He was never seen again. I honestly believe something horrible had already happened at that rest stop before I ever arrived. I think one of those men stayed outside as a lookout, talking on the phone, while the other waited inside ready to block the door when I walked in. If I had forced my way into that bathroom, I have a sick feeling about what I would have found, and I don't think they would have let me leave alive.